Okay, so we're going to start the meeting and welcome, as I said, the open session of the meeting is available to the public and will be recorded. So as we always do, we will start with a land acknowledgement. And Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that the land are undertaking our revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In addition, Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that Toronto has historically been a gathering place for many Indigenous people, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. So moving on, the next item on the agenda is a motion to approve the meeting agenda. I'd like to have a move, Kevin. Second. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Carried. Okay, are there any declarations of conflict of interest this morning? Okay, seeing none, I will move on. And so anyway, it's great that some of us are here in person, particularly with the weather. And thank you those that are joining us on video today. We have a big agenda, a lot going on. We have a review of our financial statements, capital approvals, and matters related to compensation and performance. So always we appreciate your cooperation and attention. I do want to say a couple of things. Firstly, Jeannie Shim, thank you for agreeing to stay on as a director till the end of the year. Your efforts are always greatly appreciated. And I guess I have to say, with mixed emotions, that this is my last meeting as chair of Waterfront Toronto. I've actually been on the board for 7 years, and Ian reminded me that I was chair for 4 years, how time flies. And looking back, I would say it's been an incredible privilege and honor to serve in this role. I've actually been humbled and filled with gratitude with the support that the 3 levels of government have bestowed upon me, as well as the support that this board and the past board has also given me, as well as management and our other stakeholders. When I first took over as chair, we were engaged with Sidewalk Labs, and it was clearly quite a controversy. But I think today, 4 years later, we've emerged in a much stronger position as a corporation. And I believe that our accomplishments have solidified our commitment to responsible and sustainable development. And we are in a position to lead the way, to continue to lead the way in urban innovation. So as I can start to pass the torch to my successor, I have every confidence in the future. And the next phase of our journey will be the stewardship of Villiers Island. And I suspect and hope that that will be another opportunity again to continue our efforts in terms of waterfront revitalization and being a leader, as I said, in urban innovation. Once again, in closing, I do want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone here for their support, their dedication, and professionalism. It has been an honor to serve as chair, and I'm very proud of everything that we've all accomplished together. Okay, so now I got that out of the way. Okay, the next item is the consent agenda, and I'm going to take that as being read this morning. But the that comes later. Anyway, the next item on the agenda is the approval. Oh, I think the approval of the minutes of the open session of March 27th, 2023. So could I have a motion to approve that? Thank you. Okay. And the next item is the CEO report, which I'll take as read, but I'll turn the floor over to George for anything he'd like to add to that.
Thanks, Steve. Let me first of all start by actually thanking both you and Jeannie for staying on. She's been a great contributor over, I guess you've been over 6 years as well. So 2 of our longer standing board members. But Steve, I do want to say a special thank you as the CEO and on behalf of the management group and on behalf of the board for the contributions you've given us over the last 7 years, and in particular the last 4 years as the chair. As you said, it was some challenging times, but I think we've come out even stronger at the end of the day when you look at what we've accomplished. And the CEO report itself just speaks to some of that, with the largest land deal we've ever led. The PLFP project is moving forward. It is delayed a few months, not years, like many projects, and we have government support for a small overage that we're working through with government levels. You'll be attending, so you're not done yet. You'll be attending the Love Park opening on the 23rd. Love Park, the legacy project that's being completed down by Spadina. These are all great public works projects that the public is quite excited about. And I just wanted to, first of all, just say thank you on behalf of management and all the contributions that the board has given us in terms of the support to get to this point. So
thank you, George. Appreciate it.
I've kind of highlighted many of the points that I just spoke to in the report. Cameron will get into a little bit of the great public support that we've had. We have many tours of the waterfront, and a lot of very positive comments from international and national delegations that have been through. We had over 800 people, 700, 800 people on Saturday for open doors. Again, great response by the public. They love what's going on, and that's a credit to the board. On the staffing side, as you can see in the report, we're continuing to be back in a hybrid format. We're getting ready for our move to T3, which will occur at the beginning of next year. So I think, Steve, since we have a very packed agenda, I'll just leave it at that and just take any questions people have.
Okay, any questions of George? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And the consent agenda is before you, again, taken as read. But again, there are the committee reports, and Wendy's not here, but I would just ask Kevin if there anything you'd like to add to anything in the report.
Yeah, just a couple of highlights, Steve. We met on the 29th at long and full session for productive. We have 3 approvals that we're going to recommend to the board today. One in closed. One related to the PLFP, which is what we've been talking about for some time, just a formal approval, and obviously the financial statements in our annual report. I just wanted to point out that congratulate management. We had a very good year looking at all the data. We on our corporate plan performance, we were 70% in almost all categories. I think it's done an admirable job on our capital investment plan, the KPIs, revenues. I would highlight that there are 2. On the good news front, there's one risk that's gone from high to medium, which is the Portland's flood protection, now that we have some money to fund that. But there are 3 high risks that I would just note quickly. One is around our enterprise resource planning system, which has got 1 remaining issue that management is addressing. Hopefully we'll be able to lower that risk shortly. The other 2 are related, and they're kind of the existential question we're facing. One is we've moved to high risk our non-Portlands projects because we have a funding concern there. And of course, the big question is funding our operating budget and our existence post 2024, which we need to get to a resolution of, and it'll be one of the big issues that faces the farm and the board overall.
Sorry, 2020.
Well,
but we have some funding issues after 2024.
We have some funding issues after 2024. So we can talk about those. More good news, it was a very clean audit. The BDO gave management and Lisa and her team very high marks. No concerns whatsoever. And we're going to hear about two projects that we talked about, the Portlands and the Queens Quay East Lakefill, which is the City of Toronto required project. We'll talk about that. And the other stuff I think I'll take as read is I should mention we were successful in a difficult market in renewing our D&O insurance, and without a drop in coverage, in fact, a small increase, and I think a 3% increase in the premium, which is, people might know, it's getting more and more difficult in the D&O insurance space. So, but no, I think a very productive, as I said, audit committee meeting, and go through the financial statements and projects.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Okay, appreciate all your hard work. Yeah. All right, Jack, is there anything that you'd like to report in terms of IREC?
Relatively quiet quarter in terms of activity at IREC. The project with Quayside moves forward, and we will have a more detailed report on that later.
Great.
Some questions.
And Rule, you're on the line. I don't know whether you're comfortable. I didn't warn you, but is there anything that you'd from the public agenda from Human Resources?
Thanks, Steve. I think the majority of it we're picking up in terms of the performance management process a little bit later on. So I think those are the big points.
Right. Okay, perfect. All right. So I think we've dealt with all those matters. So now we're on to communications and the events calendar. And over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've reported to HRTSR last month about fairly busy communications and events agenda. We had an open house at the Waterfront Innovation Center between May 11th and the 18th. Special thanks to Leslie for opening that and bringing greetings on behalf of the board, and to Councillor Malik for attending the Value of Play Summit that we held the next night at the Waterfront Innovation Center. We had about 270 people through, and both of them were dovetailing against Jane's Walk, which was very well attended. The ULI spring meeting had, I think, over 3,500 people attend. Thank you very much.
For how many?
44. And we had a tour which ended up at the Waterfront Innovation Center so people could see the various projects that are happening on the East Bayfront. And apparently it was one of the best received, and that's thanks to Pina because she led it. So thank you, Pina. It was a big success. And there seems to be a surging interest in projects on the waterfront. As George mentioned, we had over 700 people at the elevation in the Portlands for doors open and over a course of a day. So that's a lot. Our strategy has always been sort of talk with as opposed to talk at. And so these meetings, 300 people, 250 people, we just had a science fair of over 350 people at the Brickworks. So this is working. We're getting lots of traction. And as George also mentioned, we've got Love Park opening on the 23rd. There's a huge public appetite to attend this. There will be two special ceremonies in addition to remarks from our chair. And I would encourage people, if you're able to attend on Friday, we're guaranteeing sunny, bright weather on that day. Please do so. And then, of course, we've got Smorgasbord, which will run from the next day on the 24th until the 24th of September. So a lot going on. And then we got 10 pop-ups happening across the city. So a lot of traction. We're really pleased, and positive sentiment, which was not always the case, as the chair knows.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, seems, as I said before, that we've engaged the public and they seem to like what we're doing. That's fantastic. So Love Park is actually open now, isn't it? No, it's not. So it is on the 23rd.
On the 15th of the fences will be coming down.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
But the opening will be on the 23rd.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Welcome, Councillor Malik. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, the TTC, the reliable way to get anywhere.
You missed my closing remarks, but I'll send you a copy.
Oh, you know what? Can you just do it again? Appreciate it. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. So anyway, we're now on to Waterfront Toronto priority projects.
Can I just ask a really quick question about
Sure.
Smorgasbord?
Sure.
Is there an opening event, or is it just kind of gonna happen?
It kind of just happens. It'll be advertised. I don't know, Cameron, if you want to.
I'm not the custodian of it, but it's real success. It will just happen on the Saturday. And Christina may know more, but it should.
I know last year there was a little
Yeah.
bit of fanfare around it, so.
Yeah,
it
it was the
wasn't-
first year.
yeah,
We're hoping
okay.
that we've solidified it.
Yeah.
Unless so, we'll do a little. I think they're proposing to do a bit of our media in the lead up to it. But the first 5 weeks, we swap them out. You get diminishing returns over the 5 weeks, and so that's why they swap out the vendor.
Yeah,
So if you're able, I would say the first couple of weeks are the
Yeah, for sure.
biggest. Yeah. Although we had consistent attendance.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I went a
we had
couple of
really good
times
attendance
last
last time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Christina, anything you wanted to add to Spartanburg?
Is that we are going to be for the board to have a similar access to the vendors and the organizers as well. We just haven't solidified which week that will be on, but we'll keep you guys apprised of that. Usually they like to do that the second third week, just to make sure that the event is settled and they have all the logistics worked out before they start doing any sort of private tours. So this would be more information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One quick comment, just to echo what Cameron said, I had 150 or about 100 folks from my ULI group, the Urban Revitalization Council, tour the East Bay Front with Christina, Ed, and Chris. Everybody loved it. We ended up walking the whole area. Dream participated, as did Hines and Tridell. So we had a great time. Everybody was very impressed, and the staff showed their knowledge and professionalism perfectly. So kudos to everybody there.
Great. Great to hear that stuff. Okay, David, on to you on our Waterfront Toronto priority projects.
Thanks, Steve. Charmaine, we can go to 42. First photo is of Love Park, which is, I just mentioned, we are opening formally on June 23rd. Can I say any more about that or not?
Go ahead.
All right.
Can't stop you.
Well, you could.
Okay.
There will be 2 weddings at the opening.
Oh.
So I don't know who they are. They didn't check with me. But it should be very exciting. So, so you can see drone photo. Next slide, just a bit more detail. Charmaine. Oh,
Obviously, check.
there we go. A bit more detail. So we'll have the pool will be full of water and workers vacated. Work done. So we're very close to completion on Love Park. Next. There we go. East Bayfront, our in-water pipe. Work is all done in the water. There's one last bit of work we have to do to connect the pipe. Bit of a challenge in that PCL, who's building Limberlost Place on behalf of George Brown College, it's kind of in a inopportune spot for us. So we're working with the contractor to try and get them to let us get access to the chamber that we need to access to get this completed. So we're working on that, and otherwise we're ready to turn that over to the city. Next.
Does the fence come down then, or?
No, temporary fence is still up, and will be up until the permanent fence or some other solution is included. So we do need to have it fenced. We have the T3 Bayside nearing substantial completion. George mentioned that we're working on our move, and in fact, we'll be making our permit application this week, and hope to start construction in the next several weeks. Next, the shot of T3. Next one, Charmaine. Go. Westland, Donlands Block 10, Anishinaabe. I don't know what it's called. Yeah.
Yes, Anishinaabe Health Toronto.
So work moving along, progressing. I expect next year opening.
Yep.
Next. Yes, as mentioned, George Brown College's Limberlost Place, the second mass timber building to be constructed in the East Bayfront area, and with further buildings to come as part of Quayside.
On that project, just because it's wood and very innovative and there's been issues of cost, are they, it's not our, do we ever get any reports on how they're doing from a cost point of view on the timber versus?
We
curious.
don't. I mean, we still have frequent meetings with them. We could ask Steve if that was helpful for our own benchmarking. We could certainly ask for some information. And we're in regular touch with project managers, so happy to ask.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's more significant when the project is completed, but it would just be interesting, I think, to.
They're very happy with their progress so far.
Okay, great.
Naris, who is the project manager, she was at a couple of the East Bayfront open houses, and you know, people saw it on the tour and the ULI tour. So I'll see what we can find out.
Next slide is Lakeshore Boulevard East. Bridge, the foundations for the eastbound Lakeshore Bridge have been completed, and we are preparing for the delivery of the steel trusses that will support the roadway. That will happen over a weekend in early July. And once that's done, we'll be able to pour the road, get Enbridge to move onto that roadway, and then close the westbound road and start the work to extend the westbound bridge. Next. Just an overall shot of areas we're working on. You can see here the outline of the river and the sediment management area. The little light green areas actually reflect the park or river finish areas that we have completed. So there is a substantial amount of work complete in the river valley, and it will be essentially allowed to establish itself over the course of the next 18 plus months before we are ready to open the area up to the public. See some photos of that as we move through next stages. Next. In River Park North, we have an area where we've used what's called geofoam. This is done to allow us to raise the grades without overly increasing the weight of the soil in the area, and we're doing that as one of our geotechnical ground improvement strategies. The others being rigid inclusions, essentially a structure below grade, and where we pile dirt and do surcharging to compress the existing soil so that we don't have compression after we've done all of our construction. Next. On Commissioner's Bridge, the hydro subcontractor is in the process of installing conduits so that we can install the new wiring that will supply all of the businesses, future homes, residences, and businesses in Villiers Island. So that work is ongoing. Next, Lakeshore Bridge, you can see the finished abutments just being cleaned up a little bit and made ready for the delivery of the bridge steel. Next is constructing the levee pathways within the river valley. So these separate the wetlands from the river valley itself. And as you can see, work is ongoing to get those completed. And for the most part, the river work will be complete by the end of this summer, including finishes. Next, George mentioned the open doors. About 700 people visited, lines of 35 to 45 minutes to get up onto the platform. And we had our staff on the platform providing stationary kind of tours, showing off what we've been able to accomplish and what's coming up in the future. Next.
Mouth of the Don River, where it will meet Lake Ontario in what is currently the Polson Slip.
Our latest
The new
drone
cove
video.
on the left was designed to help people connect to the water. It will have a pebble beach and small islands that you could paddle around. Wildlife is already keen to move in. In the past year, we have spotted a mink, heron, bald eagle, and a beaver. Construction on Promontory Park is underway. We're building the foundations of the high stone walls that will be in the future park. The west side of the park will feature a water's edge promenade, similar to the walkway we've built elsewhere along the waterfront. This area, known as Promontory Park North, features two habitat coves. One is protected by a carp gate that prevents the invasive fish from entering the cove. The new alignment of Cherry Street will mean better connections for future transit, and space has been set aside for a future dedicated transit right-of-way.
Opening of Cherry Street and Commissioner's Street is now forecast for the beginning of October.
This is where the Don River will connect to the new River Valley system we're building. Villiers Street will end in a cul-de-sac, and Commissioner Street will become the main way to travel east and west through the Portlands. As part of our plans for flood protection, we need to widen and deepen the river north of Lakeshore Boulevard. This will cause sediment to fall out of the river at that location, and the sediment and debris management area will allow us to maintain the depth of the river. We're rebuilding the Lakeshore Bridge to span the wider river. Here you can see the completed substructure of the east abutment and 3 of the piers for the south side of the bridge. The island in the Don Greenway has been mostly planted, and you can see log and boulder features that will provide habitat for wildlife. The Central River Valley will be flanked by wetlands on either side. These wetlands were planted in 2022, and you can see some of the plants stirring back to life as the weather warms up. The river valley will have over 6 kilometers of trails, including this levee trail that goes between the new river and one of the wetlands. Two pedestrian bridges here will connect the trails.
Okay. And that's the last of them. Steve?
David, what was the thought process not to have Villiers Street end in a cul-de-sac rather than building a bridge across and have 2 main thoroughfares back there?
Probably cost mostly.
Chris has got his hand up. Chris, answer that.
Well, the turnaround is until we complete the road network on the island. That is a circuit around the island, and we didn't feel we needed 2 bridges because Villiers one is only about 300 meters, 400 meters north of Commissioner's one, and not cheap. So
Where Villiers meets the river, you'll be able to turn right and go over to Commissioner Street, is that?
Yeah.
that's
yeah,
right?
in the fullness of time, yes.
Great. Any other questions of David at this point? Okay, David, now let's go on to the risk update.
Certainly. Next slide, Charmaine. So this is our semi-annual from the spring of this year. Update based on the current estimate of completion and current risk analysis. It's just, we've seen this a number of times when we make these presentations. So just to the next slide, quick update on project status. As of the end of March, which is the data date for this material, 88% of the project had been awarded. Another 4.5% was in progress, with 7.6% remaining to be tendered and committed. So that will continue to grow over the course of the next several months, and we will have everything procured by the end of this year, towards completion by the end of next year. I'll assume that the status report on the various components, bridges, parks, roads and services, is taken as read, and move to slide or page 65. So on page 65 shows the Q2 22-23 forecast. Was at 1290 forecast. We are now forecasting the total project cost to be 1.35 billion. That incorporates or includes the 169 million that we've provided to governments as the additional contingency we require to complete the project. Next. Some details. I'll take most of this as read, and please stop me if you've got any questions, but
I just have one. I saw before there's 5.2% I guess, still hasn't been tendered. Is that right?
That's right.
And do you have any, I mean, we've gone through this time and time again, and I don't know actually in your area of construction, what's going on. Do you have any concerns on that 5.2%?
But yeah, we, to a degree we do. So we've actually included some additional escalation risk contingency in the numbers that we're carrying, both from an estimate of completion perspective as well as a risk perspective.
Okay, good.
We'll see that in a minute, actually, on those next slides. We can keep going. This just shows the contingency drawdown. Again, the soft cost variance, 6.5 million between September of last year and spring of this year, and that relates to the finalization of the schedule. So we can go to the changes. Yeah, if you see here the changes to the risk register, we're actually forecasting reduced risk costs in this go around, partly because we've actually realized the number of risks and included those risks in the estimate of completion. Also because we've identified some opportunities for recovery that are reflected here, as well as some other risks that we've retired. We don't believe we will be realizing those risks. So that is reflected in the difference in the risk register cost. The next slide just talks about what those specific risk changes are. And again, I won't get into the details on them. And we go to the next slide. And this, with the graph, shows the where we stand as of today. We are currently forecasting 93.7% probability of achieving our revised budget of 1.354 billion. That is slightly lower than we were in September of last year, about 3%, but still exceeding 90%. And obviously, we're continuing to manage and monitor costs as they are awarded, as well as managing the contingency and continuing to implement cost optimizations wherever we can find them. And we continue to find them. Okay, next. Just, one more. No, go back, sorry, go back to the previous one, cost risks. Steve, you can see here that we went back to.
You go forward one?
Go forward one. That's just a summary of what we're saying. Here, Steve, the number one risk that we're carrying is actually the external market forces and excessive cost escalation. So we've got estimates for what we believe the costs could be, and those actually have factored in some escalation costs. And now we've also included for additional potential escalation to reflect the uncertainties in the market. So we've been fairly conservative in this go around in terms of those issues.
But David, our new contingency is now at 42 million, right? The additional 169?
Yes,
Yeah.
currently at
So
42.
we have 42 million.
Okay. Next is schedule risk, and then that's the last of the slides. 30 questions. We'll be doing this again in September for a presentation to Farm and the board in November and December.
Great work.
Thank you.
Steve?
There is a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Rule, go ahead.
No worries. Just a quick question, more of a comment, actually. Appreciate the update. I know we got a little bit of surprise recently on the escalation of the risk and how it got realized and additional funding required. And we had a conversation about whether our assumptions for the risk register, given all the external changes, whether it was still current. And I know that that's under the Farm Committee and Kevin's leadership, and I'm going to suggest that maybe in our next strategic retreat, we could spend a little time having a look at risk from the eye of, explaining to the rest of the board so we're all comfortable as to the risk register and what the underlying assumptions are.
Sure.
Makes sense to me.
Rahul, can I just add, the board, we have BTY who reports to the board directly and monitoring everything, and we had them do a deep dive on the risks, and it was presented at the last Farm Committee meeting, and we feel comfortable that we're on top of it. But yeah, definitely will.
Did we share? I thought we shared that.
Perfect. Be a great
I think
conversation.
materials
for
are
the
all
rest.
available.
Yeah, the materials are all available. I'm not sure that we highlighted it to the board, but those
No.
materials are all available. And we've had an independent monitor on the risk question for,
Since the
this is our
beginning.
19th report we got from
Yeah.
them at the farm committee. So I think we're doing a good job looking at those assumptions, but maybe not a good job of communicating them, Ralph.
Maybe you share the last report then.
You know, from-
Yeah,
You're
we
on
full
mute.
faith in the committee. Just a good chat to have at a strategic retreat.
I think so too.
Okay, terrific. So I don't think there's any motions or anything needed, but there are some new capital projects that do need motions. So David, there's a request for supplementary capital approval on the PLFP. First one.
That's right, Stephen. This is to formalize everything we've been talking about for the last 9 or 10 months with respect to the Portlands. Now that we've gone through the process with governments, having confirmed the value and estimate for the completion of the project, and are working to firm up the funding. And just as a quick update, both the city and the province have approved the additional funding required for the project. We have completed and all parties have executed the contribution agreement amendment that adds $78 million to the project budget. We're now working on negotiating the agreements for the parks and public realm or parks finishes, $81 million funding. That is currently with the Minister's office in Ottawa for approval. Once approved, we will be able to start committing costs against that project, the parks finishes, and we continue to work to execute the agreements that we need for that funding. So moving along. So what we're doing here is getting the board to formally approve the revised budget and as part of a supplementary approval. As you can see, we're obtaining board's approval to invest an additional $169 million for a total of $1.354 million to substantially complete the Portland's flood protection as per the original scope. Next slide. I'll go reasonably quickly here again, given that we've seen a lot of this when we've met over the last several months. Deliverables that we will be achieving include really the original scope. So flood protection for the 240 hectares, the naturalized mouth of the river, the bridges, rebuilt and realigned Cherry Streets, Commissioner Street and Don Roadway, reconstruction of Lakeshore Bridge, and then the 3 new parks. Next. Just a couple of quick photos. Keep going, Charmaine. Cove. Oh, yeah, that's good. Just in terms of milestones, original capital approval was in October of 2016. The contribution agreement was signed in 2018. We are now forecasting substantial completion and the achievement of flood protection at the end of 2024, with some minor works left to complete in Promontory Park South, mostly plantings due to weather in the spring of 2025. Next. So I mentioned we have all signed the amendment to delivery agreement. We have now awarded 95% of the procurements and we are at 72% of progress to date from a construction perspective. Next. This is just a recap why the additional capital approval is required. Additional capital is required, extreme escalation, utility cost sharing, and then from schedule perspective, labor disruptions and third-party delays, reflecting the additional costs and schedule requirements to December 2024. Next. From a budget perspective, this is showing what our current original budget 1.185 and current forecast of 1.354, how it breaks down hard costs, soft costs, contingency. Next. Similarly, cost to date and what is remaining. Next. Breakdown of the contributions by the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as Waterfront Toronto, just for information. Next. From a risk perspective, as mentioned, we have the cost risk from a market perspective. There remains a risk from a soil management perspective in terms of both the amount of soil that we have to dispose. We continue to work to minimize that, but continue to find materials that we aren't able to reuse. We've got also a escalation risk on soil disposal that may affect us, and we've got some additional dredging that we are doing to maintain the depth of the river during construction that may impact us. So these are all in our current risk register. Next. So the recommendation that the Farm Committee recommended that the board approve additional funding to complete the project, sourced as noted, and that the additional capital expenditure be added to the corporation's 5-year strategic plan. And I think
1.354 billion.
billion, not million. Did it say million?
Yes.
Oh, rats.
So I guess, David, you're pretty confident that because we've spent all this time and management's done an amazing job in getting the support of government to complete the project, that we'll make it.
That is the plan. Absolutely.
I don't think there could be another plan, but anyway, okay, let's hope that that's the case.
Well, and as David said, we're looking at optimizing things as we continue. So
Right.
we're doing whatever we can to minimize that risk.
I'll just note, for example, just as one example, that in the last 2 months or so, Elliston recommended an alternative ground improvement strategy that saved us about $3 million that actually isn't reflected here. So the next report will identify that additional savings of $3 million. So we will continue to do that wherever we can.
Okay, oh, sorry, Leslie.
Just a quick question, just on the slide on the planned sources of funding. Can I assume that these conversations are underway with the levels of government
They are, yeah, beyond underway.
under the subject to approvals?
Yes, so as I mentioned, we actually, all 4 levels of government, or all 3 levels of government in Waterfront Toronto have executed the contribution agreement amendment that provides additional funding of about 80 million, 78 million. And that includes the Minister of Finance from both the province, the federal government, and the city
So
manager.
it's beyond planned.
It's beyond.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's-
that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, it's pretty
It's
well
done.
executed.
Thank
I'm just
you.
waiting for one.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I hope we don't go.
That's why, yeah, the word planned.
I think the answer is we can't. We have a big enough.
Yeah, it seems that
Might need
way.
more.
Yeah. So are there any other questions? So I would like to ask someone to move the motion that's up on the board. Jack, seconded by Jeannie. All in favor? Carried. Anyway, great work, George and David, on where we are and getting the additional funding in a very difficult time.
I do want to just acknowledge the governments that are on right now and all the support they give us to get this through as well.
Okay, so the next one is the Queens Quay East Extension Lakeville approval.
Chairman, can we go to the next slide? I'll provide the board with a brief overview of the Queens Quay East Extension Lakeville project, which is one piece of the larger Quayside Infrastructure and Public Realm project, as well as a quick update on where we're at on the Quayside project more broadly. We are today seeking board approval for capital approval for the Queens Quay East Lakeville in the amount of 33.4 million, and to confirm our approach for construction contracting, both for Quayside Public Realm and Infrastructure and the Keating Channel pedestrian bridge. Go to the next slide. The Board of Directors provided capital approval in the amount of 14.2 million for the 60% design and pre-construction services for the Quayside Infrastructure and Public Realm project, including the Queens Quay East Extension Lakeville project. That was 2.3 million of the total 14.2 million in 2021. The Queens Quay East Lakeville is an early work for the larger Quayside Public Realm and Infrastructure project, and therefore it's been advanced ahead of the rest of the infrastructure and public realm for Quayside. We are now completing 30% design for the Quayside Public Realm and Infrastructure, and we're at the 60% design milestone for the Lakeville project. Funding for the design and construction of the Quayside Public Realm and Infrastructure project is a combination of City of Toronto funding as well as land sale revenues from the Quayside project. And a delivery agreement for that work with the City of Toronto is now underway. The project is in our board approved 5-year strategic plan. Could go to the next slide. So the red triangle that you see on the map represents the Queens Quay East Extension Lakeville area. It enables the extension of Queens Quay to the east and the realignment of Parliament Street, which currently comes and hits Queens Quay on an angle. Those two projects are required in order to create the Block 3 and the Block 4 sites for the Quayside project. The remaining circles on the map are the larger Quayside Infrastructure and Public Realm project, which all of this is being undertaken in a comprehensive and integrated way to ensure that it all stays together at the end. Most of the remaining projects are at the 30% design milestone right now. Go to the next slide. Just a little bit about the project scope. The scope of the Lakeville project includes dredging of the sediment that currently sits at the bottom of the lake down to bedrock, about 3 meters, and treatment and disposal of that dredge material. 61 meters of new dock wall, which is represented by the purple line that you see on the drawing. That will be tied back using a king pile system so that we can avoid any tiebacks within the future road right away of Queens Quay. That's why you see that steep angle on the tieback. The lake fill is composed of imported granular material behind the dock wall. And then we also have, as part of the scope, rock revetment on the face of the dock wall and along the east side of the existing Parliament slip dock wall, which you see in green on the drawing. Just looking at it again in plan view, the purple line is the dock wall, the green is the extents. Oh, if we go to the next slide, Charmaine. The purple is the dock wall at the north end of the slip, and the green is the extents of the rock revetment. As you can see, that goes along the north end and the east end of the slip. Go to the next slide. Very briefly, the project timelines. We hit the 60% design milestone for the Lakeville project in April. We're expected to hit the 90% design milestone shortly, end of June, early July, and construction is anticipated to start in September, with a completion date in 2025, including any soil consolidation that needs to happen, because we do have to settle the new fill before we can start building the future road alignments on it, because we don't want the roads to. We have quite if you go to the next slide, thank you, Charmaine. We have quite a few approvals that we require for the project because we are doing lake fill. We have required approvals from Transport Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Ports Toronto, the TRCA. Wow. All of these are now underway. We've already made first submissions to the bulk of these approvals where possible. Some have to be undertaken by the contractor once they're obtained. The next slide. Capital approval is required at this time in order for us to execute the construction works for the project. Waterfront Toronto's policies and procedures require that we get capital approval after design has reached a 60% design milestone and when the planned investments are more than $5 million. We're at that point with this project. We go to the next slide, just a summary of the financials. We are seeking capital approval for a total of $34.4 million. That includes $21 million of hard costs, $6 million in soft costs, less the $2.3 million previously approved in June of 2021, $9.2 million in contingencies plus the tax. As noted, this is proposed to be funded by the City of Toronto. This has been council approved and staff are currently negotiating the delivery agreement for these funds.
30% contingent.
Go to the next slide, Charmaine. A complete risk assessment has been undertaken for the project. Based on a discussion with Farm and the Board of Directors, we have some initial lessons learned from PLFP, and David's going to walk through those.
Thanks, Pina. So the board did ask us to look at the processes that we follow to establish and forecast budgets. So we've started that process, and this, in the work that we've done on Quayside and this project specifically, we've applied some of the initial findings in our analysis, and I'll just quickly walk through them. First and foremost is when we did the budget setting for Portland's flood protection, it was done at a concept design stage. So less than 5% of design was done when the board approved the budget for this in 2016. We have modified our processes to provide for that budget setting to happen at the 60% design stage. So we know much more about the project and the design of the project and the costs therein when we board for an approval. We've also done some other work in our process now is to undertake multiple estimates using independent parties. So we've undertaken, the design team undertakes an estimate, the contractor undertakes an estimate, and then we have a third independent cost consultant who reconciles those estimates with those other two parties to develop a consensus estimate. So in that way, we are looking at validating quantities in units at multiple points to provide additional veracity, I guess, to our construction estimates. We leverage the risk process and risks identified during PLFP to undertake the risk register and complete the risk register for this project. We have applied what is called a base cost uncertainty risk as part of the risk assessment. Generally speaking, that is for unknown unknowns. And what we've done is we've skewed those numbers to a slightly more conservative analysis. Typically, that base cost uncertainty ranges from a minus number to a positive number. We have essentially more or less removed most of the negative numbers and put the positive numbers at a higher percentage. So to account for black swan type events, escalation, things that we can't quantify as easily as other risks. And then, as I mentioned, we've included excess market risk for escalation at a higher rate to account for potentially higher escalation costs. So those are some of the early learnings from the Portland's assessment, and we'll get back to the board in the fall with a full assessment of what we intend to do to make sure that, or to give ourselves more comfort that the work that we're doing will lead to the appropriate results.
And go to the next slide, Charmaine.
Jack has a question.
Sorry, I've misremembered. When we sold the Quayside lands, we had a significant number of line items of infrastructure that we had to build in order to deliver them.
Correct.
And we were allocating monies from the receipt of the sale proceeds to do those.
That's right.
This says that we're getting the city of Toronto to pay this. Is this come back with, was there a trade-off when we agreed to fund the affordable housing that they're now paying for this piece of infrastructure, or was this something separate from all this?
We committed to 142 million to the infrastructure from a variety of sources. They weren't specific, but some DCs and other sources. So they committed to 142 million. We were covering the rest through the Quayside land sale revenues for the total at the time. And now that there is a potential gap, we have started discussions with the city. We have started discussions as of today with the other two levels of government to let them know that we'll be coming back to try and discuss, what course of action we can take to close the gap, where we can look to governments to help us with that through potentially DC money.
So I'm not sure, where did the gap come from though? I thought.
Timing of the estimates.
So, yeah, so the of the $250 million that we're funding, that we're carrying for the infrastructure.
Out of the proceeds from the sale?
No, 250 is the total.
Okay.
142 of that is actually from the city, from DCs and others. The balance of the 110 million is out of proceeds from Quayside.
Okay.
So that is the amount of funding that we established. However, our current estimates exceed the amount of funding that we established. So we are going through a process now to determine how do we reduce those costs? Can we defer some of the infrastructure to allow us to proceed? Because right now the cost of all of that infrastructure exceeds the funding that we have available for it.
By how much?
About 60 million, 25%.
And so does that gap put at risk our ability to deliver the infrastructure required to get Quayside Impact to close phase 2?
No, we believe that we have a plan and we'll continue to develop plans, but we think we have a plan that allows us to meet all of those requirements and still be able to defer some of the work.
Thank you.
Can I just add that the discussions with the city have been very positive, and that there will be some opportunities in the future for adjustments as we go ahead. And that wasn't contemplated for the delivery agreement.
And we just.
So I wasn't just remembering.
No, and we discussed this at farm at the last meeting, making sure that we keep everybody up to speed.
No, that's good.
Great.
I've got a couple more slides. I'll
Okay, sorry.
super
Yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
Sorry, Pina.
No problem, through these last few slides, and then we can. So the slide that's up on the screen here, you can see as part of our risk quantification process, we always sit and brainstorm all the potential risks the project could face. The two major ones that were highlighted as part of this process were escalation higher than planned. I don't think we could not have this on the list given what's happening. And availability of marine contracts / subcontractors. This is a very niche area. And so if there aren't contractors available, you may get slightly less competitive project processes. So these risks were all part of the simulation that was undertaken. If we go to the next slide, risk quantification process. The results of that process have identified that to reach the 90th percentile, risk-based contingency is proposed at 9.2 million. So that's what has been included in the $36.7 million number for the cost of the project. We go to the next slide. As David and Meg mentioned, the Queens Quay Lakefill's is part of a broader Quayside program. And as David and Meg mentioned, in April 2023, we completed the 30% design for the larger project. At that time, cost estimates were undertaken following our new process of getting a cost estimate done by the construction manager, the designer, and then a third-party cost estimator. A full risk assessment is being undertaken for the full project, and the 30% cost estimate is currently projecting to exceed the estimate undertaken as part of the due diligence report, the $250 million that Meg and David spoke of. There's lots of reasons for this, including unprecedented escalation that the entire construction industry has seen over the time frame since due diligence was completed in 2021, as well as just scope changes, things we didn't know in 2021 that we know much better now that we have a partner on board and are working closely with the Quayside Impact team. We're further optimizing the design, and as Megan and David said, we're assessing alternative approaches, sequencing, deferrals, and we will report back to the farm and the board of directors. We're anticipating 60% design milestone early in 2024, but likely report back on a regular basis.
I think as we discussed at the farm committee, there's only, was it 2 general contractors who are capable of doing this work?
There's very few.
Yeah.
I think I know of 2. I don't know if there's more. Yeah.
That doesn't help us.
Doesn't help us a lot.
Not from a competition perspective. Segueing to construction contractor. In June 2021, the board approved that we secure pre-construction services through the engagement of a construction manager. We undertook a competitive procurement process and brought on Eastern Construction in June of 2022. Staff recommend working with Eastern Construction to provide construction and post-construction services for the full Quayside Public Realm and Infrastructure project, including the Lakeville project, which is set to commence in September. Go to the next slide. Given the location of the Keating Channel pedestrian bridge, which has its north landing overlapping the Quayside site, specifically the 333 Lakeshore Block 5 site, which is proposed to be the staging site for all of the Quayside infrastructure public realm. We are recommending that the Keating Channel pedestrian bridge be added to the scope of the construction manager for the Quayside Infrastructure Public Realm project to avoid possible Ministry of Labor constructor issues if two different contractors are working in the same site at the same time. So with that, I think we can go to the recommendations. So Farm has already reviewed and is recommending to the Board of Directors for approval the capital expenditure of 34.4 million to complete the Queens Quay East Extension project, Lakeville component only. The Quayside Infrastructure and Public Realm project be constructed by Eastern Construction as the construction manager under their existing contract with Waterfront Toronto, and that the Keating Channel pedestrian bridge be added to the scope of the construction manager management agreement for the Quayside Infrastructure Public Realm project. These are conditional upon the execution of the bilateral delivery agreement with the City of Toronto for the project funding, and management will report back to the Farm Committee and Board of Directors with a comprehensive update on the Quayside Infrastructure Public Realm project at the 60% design milestone.
You know, sorry, I'll just ask the question then, Judy. When do you think the agreements will actually go to City Council?
Well, City Council's already approved the budget.
Okay.
The agreements themselves don't have to go to City Council for approval.
It's a staff delegated.
Okay, so it's basically done. Okay, Judy?
Pina, this Keating Channel pedestrian bridge, is that the one for which we receive funding?
Correct.
$9 million?
Yes.
So we're adding this to the Quayside infrastructure, which we were just told there's a gap, but shouldn't have any effect because it's fully funded?
It is funded by funding outside of the
Okay,
200.
so we're just adding it, but it's fully funded.
Correct.
So it's not adding to the gap.
No.
Okay.
Right.
Is that funding public now, for the Keating Bridge?
Yes. Yes.
That's the federal government, right?
It was a federal, yeah.
Yeah. Councilor Malik?
Yeah, I just had a question. I know last time we had talked quite a bit about the Parliament Slip project, and I just had a question about the plan condition for the Parliament Slip, the interim treatment, and the protection for future improvements. I know that was a big part of our conversation. What is the kind of course of action around that, given that there's no timeline with this deferral?
Sure. So the Lakeville piece itself, that is part of the future public right of way for Queens Quay. So it would be completely not as part of the Quayside Infrastructure Public Realm project. It'll be finished to the ultimate Queens Quay improvement level. So we'll have the road in on top of the Lakeville, the Parliament Street alignment will tee in,
Right.
and the public sidewalk will be built in alignment with what we're doing on the rest of the Quayside frontage of Queens Quay.
Okay, so interimly, it's just going to be the same maintenance as everything else?
Correct.
The
Yeah,
same
it'd
work
just be road right away in the
Okay.
interim.
And nothing being done, the implementation when funding's available of the plans.
For Parliament Slip?
For Parliament
No,
Slip.
nothing is being done to preclude Parliament Slip from ultimately happening.
At some point in the future.
Yes.
One day.
Oh, sorry, roll.
Sure, just a quick question. In the ordinary course, we would do an RFP for the procurement of the pedestrian bridge. And in this case, we're saying, let's just scoop it under the scope of the other one. Do our policies allow us to do that?
Yes, they actually do. Given where this is located, given that it's possible, Rahul, that we'll actually be removing portions of the work that was in the list that we tendered through Eastern. So we can both remove and add if appropriate. We will be tendering. Sorry. Oh, hit the wrong one. We will be tendering the bridge and all the sub components of the bridge as sub-trade work. So it will all be competitively procured. The only part of it, and it was competitively procured the Eastern contract, but that portion of it, which is Eastern's fees, essentially will be or has been procured already in a competitive basis. So yes, our procurement process allows us to do this.
And Rahul, if you could recall, the reason we have to expedite this is the federal funding has a time limit. So we need to be able to meet that time limit to complete the project to get their funding.
Super. And on a go forward, really helpful if a recommendation like that identifies in the material that it complies with our policies, takes that question off the table.
Got it.
Thanks.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, could I have a motion? Jack? Okay. Jeannie, good.
Right.
All in favor, got a vote.
Mhm.
Carried. Thanks. Okay, we have another very exciting item coming up.
The settlement's very exciting.
Sorry, Lisa.
Okay.
The year-end audited financial statement.
I love this stuff, by the way.
So do we.
That's like a chair farm.
Thanks, Steve, for that wonderful introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. The corporation's March 31st, 2023 year-end audited financial statements are being presented today for board approval, and they are required by our act to be signed and delivered to governments by the end of this month. Before I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Sampada Shandane, who is our Director of Financial Management, to provide a few brief highlights of the statements, which reflect very good results for the corporation, I would just like to outline a couple of items for the board. The first is that Waterfront Toronto follows the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards for not-for-profit organizations. And this year we've had one change in accounting policy related to development costs, which Sampada will touch on, and the Farm Committee in detail at their February meeting and also approved. The second is that these financial statements reflect the closing of phase 1 of a major development agreement, Quayside, in accordance with accounting principles. It is important to note that not all of the revenues associated with this closing have been recognized in these financial statements. And that's because there are certain future payments that are subject to certain subsequent performance conditions. And then the third is, and most important, is that BDO Canada, our external auditors, Kevin alluded to this earlier in the meeting, met with our Farm Committee at the end of May. And at that meeting, they provided they reported that they intend to issue an unqualified clean audit opinion. And Charmaine, if you just want to move to page 119, we've included in the materials here the 2-page audit report of the external auditors. And where you see the second paragraph there, is, in our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects, which is the opinion. The rest of the report also outlines the basis for their opinion that they have audited Waterfront Toronto in accordance with Canadian Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, as well as the responsibilities of management, farm, the board, and the auditors themselves. So with that, Sampada, I'll just ask you to provide a few brief highlights for the benefit.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm presenting the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ended March 31st, 2023. I would like to walk the board through some of the key items included in the statement and notes in order to provide a bit more detail to explain some of these numbers. Before I begin, I would like to mention that these financial statements reflect the impact of two significant items, as mentioned by Lisa in her opening remarks. One being the impact of the closing of phase 1 of Quayside development, and the second being the impact of the change in the accounting policy relating to the expensing of the land under development costs, which was approved by the Farm Committee in February 2023. And this has been explained in greater detail in note 3 of the financial statements. With that, if we can just turn to page 121 of the material, Charmaine, which is the statement of the financial position. The first two items, cash and short-term investments of 119 million, they're slightly higher compared to what we had, the number as of March 31st, 2022. And this is because of the realization of the sales proceeds relating to the closing of the phase 1 of Quayside. The next item is 81 million of receivables. Of this 81 million, 60 million pertains to the claims made to the federal government and the province for the Portlands project. While the claim from the federal government has been realized in May, the amount from the province still remains outstanding as of today. We understand that all due diligence has been completed and there are no concerns with respect to the receipt of this amount. It's merely a technical issue with respect to remitting the funds that they are trying to sort out at their end. The next item is restricted cash. The number of 62 million. It's slightly higher due to construction holdbacks, mainly for the Portlands, which is consistent with the level of activity in the Portlands this fiscal year. I should also note that in addition to the restricted cash of 62 million, we have a capital reserve account that we have created this fiscal year of 15.4 million, which is included in the unrestricted cash, not the restricted cash. And this is to address some future program level contingencies like cost escalation for projects, etc. Again, this is designated cash and has been included under unrestricted cash. The next item is the assets under development. If you read the cover page of the financial statements, we have indicated that the corporation has spent a total of 311 million this year. Now this 311 million, of this 311 million, 264 million is reflected in the number under assets under development. 20 million relates to the purchase or the acquisition of the parliament slip, which is under capital assets. And the rest, about 26 million, is reflected in the statement of financial activities, which I'll discuss briefly when I discuss the statement. The next item is term receivables of 41 million. As Lisa mentioned in her opening, we have this reflects or these relate to the deferred payments of the quayside closing, phase 1. We have recognized about 158 million of revenues this fiscal year. Of the 158 million, we have actually realized 119 million, and the rest 41 million are deferred, and they are expected to be realized in December 2024 and March 2027. The last item on the statement of financial position is the deferred contributions. We can see that the number has gone down from 200 million last year to about 135 million this year. And this is related to this is mainly because of the utilization of working capital for the Portlands. We haven't requested any funding for the Portlands project from the city this year, and we are essentially drawing down on the working capital that we have, and that's why the reduction in the deferred contributions. This is the statement of financial positions. If we can just please turn over, Charmaine, to page 122, which is the statement of financial activities. I'd like to go through some of the items, especially revenues in the statement and some expenses. So the restricted revenues of 192 million are lower compared to the same time period last fiscal year. Again, because we have not requested any funding, sorry for that, not requested any funding for the Portlands from the city over here, consistent with our drawdown of deferred contributions that we spoke about in the statement of financial position. And then we have the item of expense on expenses, about 23.6 million. Again, this is a part of the combined 311 million that we have spent in this fiscal year. The next and the last item on statement of financial activities is the land sale proceeds. Again, as I mentioned, this relates to the quayside phase 1 closing. We recognized 158 million. However, the 86 million is net of the cost of the land and expensing of certain development costs that we have incurred in bringing the land to market. The last item that I would like to go through is in the notes to financial statements, and that appears on page 130 of the material. Charmaine, can you please turn to page 130 of the material? This is note 14B, and this is our unrestricted surplus note. As noted, as a result of realization of the sales proceeds of the quayside phase 1, this 65 million is now a deficit. It has been surplus. It has been reversed from a deficit that we have seen in the past few years. So that's significant, and thought I'd draw the attention of the board to this. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
It's Paul. Sorry, do I need to put my hand up? Is that easier, Steve?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I have a question about the short-term investment, which is on page 119. Can you just provide some color on that? Under assets? Yeah, page 119 or page 4 of the.
Yeah. So these are investments in guaranteed investment certificates with the commercial bank. These are short-term in nature, and they're expected to be fully realized. They are mostly 6 months and 9 months duration, and they're just high interest bearing compared to what we get in our regular bank account, and they're expected to be fully realized by March 2023.
And how is that governed, where we put our investments and expected return on it?
We have an investment policy, Paul, that outlines what we can invest in that has previously been approved by the farm committee and the board some years back. So we can really only invest in, I think it's like AAA, AA investments, and they can't be longer term than a year.
12 months.
12 months, because of the nature of our operations. So that those investments are invested in line with that. And as Sampata mentioned, these ones are with another bank. And really it's to maximize interest given the cash that we just received as a result of closing on Quayside lands.
Which makes sense. So just to make sure I'll say it back to you, what I heard you say is, listen, there is a policy of how we invest money, and before you invest it, do you go to the farm committee for approval, or is that decision with the management team?
Because it's in line with the policy, and it's disclosed as part of our financial statements to the farm committee as part of that, the quarterly statements, these being the year-end statements, the first time that they've appeared.
Very good. Thank you.
If all your questions are all the exact ones I asked at the meeting. And it is an important item now because we're talking about $4.5 million of interest on these funds on an annual basis, which 2 years ago it was not $1 million. So it has to be watched closely.
Kevin, do you have any other comments on these statements, or your?
Nope. Congratulate the management team on the audit from BDO was very complimentary, and I think they're pretty straightforward, and the audit committee unanimously recommends them for approval.
Okay, hearing that, could we have and thank you very much. Could we have a motion to approve the audited financial statements?
Steve, I had a couple questions along the way. Hey?
Just a couple of quick ones?
Well, let's see. I think so. George, I sent those to you in advance. Sorry, I didn't send them to you, Lisa. I got a little bit turned around, but can we just address those really quickly? Quick question around independence of BDO. Are they doing any other consulting work for Waterfront Toronto?
They do not do any other consulting work, and they actually report their independence. They actually reported to the farm committee at their last meeting. Yeah.
Super. The going concern question that I'd raised around the absence of a mandate right now. I'm just curious, has the language year over year in the audit letter changed around going concern? It seemed a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, no, it hasn't changed. And typically the accounting principles around going concern are related to 12 months that the organization can continue operating for at least the next 12 months. And so that's typically what is reviewed by the external auditors and is included in their audit report, although it doesn't refer to 12 months, it just refers to going concern, but the CPA handbook refers to the 12-month period. And so obviously we're completely able to continue operations for at least the next 12 months.
Right. Okay. The language isn't quite that in the report, but I accept that answer. That's not a problem. Last one though is around note 18 and the environmental contamination liability. And it was only down at 2.3 million. And it just struck me, that seemed like a low number considering all the work that we're doing on the waterfront. And it seemed restricted to one property. And that's just for a little bit of context around that.
Absolutely. So the one property relates to 7 Queens Quay, which is at the foot of Yonge Street, the parking lot there that we operate on an interim basis as parking. That will ultimately become a public park, so it's not a revenue generating asset. So we've recognized a liability for that site. There is a legal environmental standard that where we would be seeking to meet when we do build it as a park. We've recognized that liability. For the other land that we own, those will ultimately earn revenues higher than what the cost of the environmental contamination is. So we have not recognized a liability on those sites. And then for PLFP, we don't own that land, and the remediation is part of the project. It's part of the project obligation. So we expense that. It's already costed in as part of the project and expense that way.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll take that offline with you. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it, but I understand what you're getting at.
Sure.
Right.
Thanks, Brewell. Oh, sorry, Leslie. Yeah.
So my question is that, I will not knowing, but I'm going to ask this as a governance question. Is it normal to approve
audited financial statements or receive audited financial statements. I just know that on other boards I serve on, we don't approve them, we receive them because we didn't do them, they're done by an independent. And so I'm just a question from anybody who's an expert in this space, because it's worded as an approval. So it's a technicality that I'm asking.
So our act actually requires the board to approve them.
Okay.
So comes from that governance perspective. Our quarterly financial statements, which are unaudited, are noted as being received by the board and the farm committee. So that would be the nuance, but I understand the requirement comes from our act.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that point of clarification.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, can I have a motion then?
To approve.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll move it on that.
Okay. Laurie and Leslie, thank you. All those in favor? Barry, thank you. Okay, so we are now going into a very exciting part of the meeting where we get to appoint my successor. So Jack, I'd ask you to leave the room at this point. I already have it. So as you're aware,
Coming back?
yeah. I guess if he doesn't get voted in, I don't think he will be coming. But just by way of background, the board, I think everybody's aware that we've gone through an extensive process before determining a choice for my successor. And having gone through that process, Jack Winberg's name has been through the HRGSR committee for approval. The one thing that I would like to point out, so everybody is aware, my appointment came as from all three levels of government and was endorsed by the board. In this particular case, because we're in the middle of a mayoralty election, Jack's appointment will be approved by the board based on the term that we carefully reviewed last time in terms of the wording of the resolution, which allows the board to make its decision at any point in time if there's to be a change. But I think it's our hope. I have talked to representatives of the provincial government and the federal government. We're very content, and we'll just have to wait and hope that that the new mayor and the new city council will also endorse Jack, which I think would be a benefit to the corporation to have three levels of government again support the new chair. So having said all that, I'd like to turn the floor over, Rule, from your committee on any further comments you'd like to make, and in terms of the motion.
Sure. Thanks very much, Steve. And strictly speaking, it's Wendy's committee, but she's deputized me today. She'll be joining the call shortly, but didn't want to hold up the proceedings. So just to reiterate, Steve's right. The GSR committee did review this and approved it to the extent that it's a recommendation. So the committee is recommending to the board that they consider, and if deemed appropriate, approve Jack Weinberg as the incoming chair. And as Steve noted too, that the chair under the act will serve at the pleasure of the shareholders. But it's important as an organization that we have a continuity and succession upon Steve's departure. So as many of you know, Jack's been a board member for about 4 years. He's chaired the IRET committee, supported a lot of matters, including the Quayside transaction and a lot of other aspects of Waterfront Toronto. And on that basis, I'm happy to put the motion forward for Jack's approval. And Steve, I'll hand it back to you if the board has any other questions or comments.
Okay, well, can I have a seconder for the motion? And then if there's any discussion, Kevin?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Just a question I was gonna ask. Jack is right now appointed by who?
City of Toronto.
City, so do we still have 444 and the chairman now?
No, it would, and it would still remain the same.
Yeah.
But if Jack is then approved by all three levels of government, then the City of Toronto would have a vacancy on the board.
Okay.
That would then be filled.
Okay, got it.
So I guess to that point, just about the three levels of government. So the timeframe is that once the mayoralty is finished, then there's an affirming of the role by all three levels, hopefully.
Correct.
Okay, and then that finalizes the
Right.
chairperson.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that's helpful.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, should we bring Jack back in and,
I hope he's still there.
or just tell him there's a heavy debate and go get a coffee?
When you weren't there.
All right, Jack, the board has avoided you as my successor starting on July 1st.
Congratulations, Jack.
So we are now going to go into closed session. There's a lot in the agenda. We've been sitting here for a bit. I'm going to suggest that we maybe take a 5-minute nature break, stretch our legs, and come back all refreshed for the closed session.
So can we go make a motion to go into closed before we do that?
Oh, sorry, motion to go into closed. Laurie, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Back in open session. Could I have a motion to approve the March 27th, 2023 board meeting, closed session minutes? Okay, Leslie, Kevin, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. I have a motion to approve the compensation arrangement for the CEO of the corporation as described to the board in the meeting. Is there a mover and seconder? Make it count. Counselor, Counselor Payne.
That's a different kind of counselor. Hey.
Okay, gotta slow down. I'm just trying to get it, but done before 4:05. Can I have a motion to approve the Lakeshore Boulevard, East Bridge and public realm matters as described to the board in the meeting? Is there a mover and a seconder? Okay, Councillor Malik, Jeannie Shim, all approved, carried. Okay, a motion to approve the recruitment activities described to the board in the meeting. Is there a mover and seconder? Alicia and Jack. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Can I have a motion to approve the 2022-2023 integrated annual report as amended? Is there a mover and seconder? Leslie and Councillor Malik.
The words as amended.
As amended.
And to make sure that you caught that.
I got the resolution.
Amended it to enhance the profile of the government partners.
All in favor? Okay, so I think I have said everything that I can say. I look forward to the next part of the evening more than anything. And as I said before, it's been an honor and a privilege, and wish the corporation the greatest amount of success in the future.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.